Queen Mary I of England, often referred to as Bloody Mary, was born on February 18, 1516, at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, London, as the daughter of King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She was the only surviving child of their marriage, a union that had been at the center of a significant political and religious upheaval in England. Her birth came after a series of male children who died early, and her parents had long desired a male heir, which contributed to the marital tensions between Henry VIII and Catherine. Mary's early life was marked by the turbulence of her parents' relationship. Her father's desire for a male heir led to his eventual split from the Catholic Church, resulting in the establishment of the Church of England. This change caused Mary to be declared illegitimate after her mother's marriage to Henry was annulled in 1533, and her father married in Boleyn, which further distanced her from the English throne. However, Mary remained devoted to her Roman Catholic faith, in stark contrast to her father's shift toward Protestantism. Throughout her early years, Mary was largely excluded from political affairs, though she retained her royal status and title. The death of Anne Boleyn in 1536 and subsequent marriages of her father left Mary in a precarious position, especially as her half-brother, Edward VI, ascended to the throne in 1547. She spent much of this time in relative isolation, but remained deeply committed to the Catholic faith, which caused political friction in the Protestantizing court. In 1553, following the death of her half-brother, Edward VI, Mary's claim to the throne became paramount. Edward had named Lady Jane Grey as a successor in an attempt to preserve the Protestant direction of England. However, this led to widespread resistance and a brief 9-day reign for Lady Jane. Mary, supported by the Catholic majority and her loyal followers, marched to London, where she was declared queen on July 19, 1553, after Jane's abdication. Her reign, which lasted from 1553 to 1558, was a tumultuous one. One of Mary's first actions as queen was to restore Roman Catholicism in England, reversing the Protestant reforms of her father and brother. This led to the Marian persecutions, during which over 280 Protestants were burned at the stake, earning her the epithet Bloody Mary. These actions, while rooted in her strong Catholic beliefs, were deeply unpopular among many of her subjects and are considered a central factor in her negative legacy. Mary's personal life was also fraught with challenges. In 1554, she married Philip II of Spain, which was part of a political alliance designed to strengthen England's position in Europe. The marriage, however, was unpopular with her English subjects, who viewed Philip as a foreign interloper, and it produced no heirs, which further contributed to her dissatisfaction. Mary's reign saw continued religious turmoil as she struggled to secure a Catholic dynasty, but her failure to produce an heir marked a significant disappointment. In addition to her marriage and religious policies, Mary faced political challenges and wars abroad. Her decision to support her husband, Philip II, in the Habsburg struggle against France in the mid-1550s led to the loss of Calais, England's last possession in France, in 1558. This defeat further eroded her popularity and left her reign in an uncertain position. Mary's health deteriorated as her disappointment over not having a child deepened, and by late 1558, she was seriously ill. She died on November 17, 1558, at the age of 42, and was succeeded by her half-sister, Elizabeth I, who would go on to become one of the most iconic monarchs in English history. Mary's legacy is deeply contested. While she is remembered for her violent religious persecutions, she also had a genuine desire to restore Catholicism to England, which was part of a broader European struggle between Catholicism and Protestantism. Her reign, while short, was marked by political strife, religious conflict, and personal disappointment. The era she governed was one of significant change in England, setting the stage for the eventual Protestant ascendancy under Elizabeth I. Mary's death marked the end of the Tudor dynasty's immediate line. As her sister Elizabeth I ascended the throne, she brought stability to England after years of religious conflict and political upheaval. Elizabeth would go on to establish Protestantism firmly in England, reversing the Catholic policies Mary had worked so hard to reinstate. While Elizabeth's reign stood in stark contrast to Mary's, the religious divisions that plagued Mary's rule would continue to shape the country for generations. Despite the controversy that surrounded her reign, the historical perspective on Mary has evolved over time. Early historical accounts, largely shaped by Protestant writers, painted her as a bloodthirsty tyrant, obsessed with Catholic restoration at any cost. These portrayals were reinforced by the brutal nature of the Marian persecutions. However, more recent historians have begun to view Mary with greater nuance, understanding her actions within the context of the deep religious and political divisions of her time. Some see her as a woman of conviction, deeply committed to her faith and her family's legacy, who faced immense challenges in a deeply patriarchal society. Mary's struggles with her own identity, her relationship with her father, and the loss of her mother and kingdom marked much of her personal and political life. Throughout her reign, she was often seen as a tragic figure, caught between her desire to fulfill the legacy of her mother, her devotion to Catholicism, and the pressures of ruling a nation that was moving in a different religious direction. Her emotional and personal toll was significant, and this, along with the failure of her marriage to Philip II and her inability to produce an heir, left her reign with an undeniable sense of disappointment. In the modern era, scholars have reconsidered Mary's role in history, taking into account her efforts to maintain and protect the monarchy. Despite her reign's turbulent nature, she did have successes in terms of restoring order to a politically divided nation. Her reign was the last gasp of Catholic dominance in England, and it was only in the aftermath of her death that England definitively embraced Protestantism under Elizabeth. Although Mary failed to secure her religious legacy through her own bloodline, she did set the stage for Elizabeth's consolidation of Protestantism, which defined the nation's religious landscape for centuries. In terms of cultural impact, Mary has been the subject of numerous books, plays, and films, reflecting her enduring fascination as a monarch who struggled against overwhelming odds. Her life has become emblematic of the tragic consequences of political and religious conflict, and her legacy is one of both religious zealotry and personal sorrow. The complexities of her reign, her determination, failures, and the toll they took on her health and spirit, continue to spark debate among historians and contribute to her place as one of England's most complex and controversial monarchs. Following Mary's death, the legacy of her reign continued to influence the political and religious climate of England. Her half-sister Elizabeth I, who inherited the throne in 1558, quickly reversed the Catholic policies of Mary's reign, re-establishing Protestantism as the national faith. The Elizabethan religious settlement of 1559 marked the end of the Catholic counter, reformation that Mary had so fervently pursued. Elizabeth, unlike her sister, was able to maintain religious stability, though not without its own tensions. Elizabeth's Protestant rule would come to define English identity and separate the country from Catholic Europe. While Mary's efforts to restore Catholicism were ultimately unsuccessful, they had lasting effects on the English Catholic community. The Marian exiles, those who fled England during Mary's persecutions, would later play a significant role in the Catholic resistance to Protestantism, particularly during Elizabeth's reign. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, a key event during Elizabeth's rule, was seen by many English Catholics as a divine punishment for their queen's policies. Mary's marriage to Philip II and her alliance with Spain had set the stage for this international conflict, and although the Armada was defeated, tensions between Catholic and Protestant forces in Europe remained high. Mary's failure to secure a Catholic heir and her childless death also had profound political implications. Had she produced an heir, the course of English history could have been very different, as the Catholic succession might have endured through her descendants. Instead, her death left the throne to Elizabeth I, who had no direct heirs of her own. With Elizabeth's death in 1603, the English crown passed to the Stuart family, with James VI of Scotland becoming James I of England. This marked the beginning of a new era in English history, the union of the English and Scottish crowns, which was seen as a resolution to the dynastic conflicts that had plagued the Tudor family. In terms of popular memory, Queen Mary I's reign has often been overshadowed by that of her more famous sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth's long reign, 1558 to 1603, is viewed as a period of relative stability and the consolidation of Protestantism, and she is often remembered as one of England's greatest monarchs. Mary's reign, by contrast, is often defined by her attempts to restore Catholicism through violence and the execution of Protestants. Yet, with time, historians have revisited Mary's actions in a more sympathetic light, recognizing the religious and political pressures she faced as a woman in a male-dominated world, striving to fulfill her father's vision and her own religious convictions. Mary's personal hardships, including her troubled marriage to Philip II of Spain, are also a significant part of her legacy. Her failure to produce an heir with Philip II marked the end of any possibility for the restoration of a Catholic dynasty. Their marriage, which was both politically and diplomatically significant, was never a love match. Philip, who had a distant and often indifferent relationship with Mary, returned to Spain soon after their marriage, leaving Mary alone in a deeply uncertain political landscape. Her struggles with personal loss, political isolation, and the public's reception of her rule shaped her emotional state and health. It is said that by the time of her death, she had grown increasingly anxious and despondent, with some contemporaries suggesting that she suffered from melancholia. Mary's life was marked by personal grief, religious devotion, and a fervent desire to restore the faith of her ancestors to England, but her reign ultimately lacked the support and stability she needed to achieve lasting success. Though the historical view of Mary has often been dominated by her persecution of Protestants, modern scholars have acknowledged her attempts to secure stability for her kingdom, her struggle for survival against the tides of religious reform, and the challenges she faced as a female monarch. Her reign was short but marked by significant events that reverberated through English history. The failure of her restoration of Catholicism, her childless death, and her tumultuous personal life left England poised for the era of Elizabeth, but also made clear the deep divisions that still existed within the realm. Today, Queen Mary I's place in history is a complex one seen primarily as a religious fanatic and a brutal monarch. Her reign is now recognized for the difficult circumstances she faced and the broader struggles for religious and political control in 16th century Europe. Her story remains one of personal tragedy, political failure, and the deep religious conflicts that would continue to shape the future of England long after her death. Her legacy lives on as a figure who fought for her convictions at great personal cost, and as a monarch whose reign, though brief and largely unsuccessful, played a significant role in shaping the future of the British monarchy and the nation's religious identity. Mary's legacy, although overshadowed by her sister Elizabeth's more successful reign, remains an important part of English history. Despite the challenges and controversies of her rule, Mary I's efforts to revive Catholicism in England marked a significant chapter in the nation's religious and political evolution. The policies she enacted, especially the Marian persecutions, left a deep scar in the English Protestant memory, but they also solidified the conflict between the Catholic and Protestant factions, a struggle that would continue to reverberate throughout the centuries. Though Mary was unable to fulfill her goal of establishing a Catholic dynasty through her marriage to Philip II of Spain, her attempts to restore the Catholic faith were not entirely without effect. The Marian exiles, many of whom had fled the country during her reign, later played key roles in the development of English Protestantism. This included the establishment of English Protestant colonies and networks in Europe, particularly in the Netherlands and Geneva. These exiles were returned to England during Elizabeth's reign, where they contributed to the development of a stronger and more organized Protestant church. Mary's reign also marked a time of significant international tension. Her marriage to Philip II was part of a broader strategy to align England with the Catholic powers of Europe against the growing strength of Protestantism. However, the marriage, and by extension, the political alliance with Spain, was deeply unpopular in England. Her marriage was viewed by many as an unwelcome foreign influence, and it added fuel to the growing anti-Spanish sentiment in the English population. This sentiment would later influence England's involvement in the European conflict of the time, including the eventual war with Spain. Mary's struggles were compounded by her lack of political experience, a challenge that was often exacerbated by the gendered expectations of her time. As a female monarch in a deeply patriarchal society, she faced considerable obstacles in asserting her authority. Her reign was characterized by her attempts to navigate a male-dominated political landscape while contending with immense religious pressure. Despite her sincere devotion to Catholicism, her policies often appeared inconsistent, driven by both personal and political considerations. This inconsistency contributed to her inability to stabilize her reign, particularly in the face of growing Protestant opposition. Her death in 1558 marked the end of the Tudor dynasty's direct line, which had begun with Henry VII in 1485. The transition to Elizabeth I's rule brought the English monarchy into a new phase, marked by the firm establishment of Protestantism. Elizabeth's long reign ensured that Mary's Catholic restoration would be short-lived, and the religious struggles that defined the 16th